Hi, my name is Sharon, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Sharon.
I have been through this process with the help of two big book step study sponsors, lots of meetings like this, a loving and patient God. I've done my amends, and I practice the latter steps to the best of my willingness and ability on a daily basis. The one thing that happened that I know is God is that I came in here and there were a lot of familiar faces. And it certainly does help when you come to a meeting for the first time to see, and I just feel comfortable. This room gives off some really good energy. So thank you for that. Can you not hear me? Okay. Oh. Okay, let's see. How's that?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I was saying that this room gives off a lot of energy, and I was really glad when I came to see familiar faces, starting with Joe in the parking lot, so I knew it was going to be a good day. Let's see, where do I start? I'll tell you a story. Years ago, not even sure how many at this point, but I was in church, and choir was singing, and we were standing and singing a hymn or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden, the room faded away. The choir faded away, everything faded away, and I found myself in this, it's hard to describe it right now, in this essence, this space that felt, the only way I can describe it was incredibly sweet. It was just one of these powerful, powerful moments that I had never felt and haven't felt since, but I remember thinking I don't want to ever leave this feeling. And I know today that it was my God. And I believe that in that moment, He was telling me that He would always be with me. Even though I didn't know that at the time, but that's how I understand it today because of all the trials and tribulations I've gone through, being an alcoholic and all the jackpots I found along the way. I lived to tell it. And so I, like everybody else, was first of all, I'm grateful that I experienced that because I've drawn on that many a time when I was, when things were a little dark. But when I was drinking, I was a typical alcoholic. You know, I had all the jackpots. I'm not going to go through all the messes because we all know them. I think we all tell the same story except in different ways. But at the end of the day, we're alcoholics and we're here because none of that worked. And the pain got too deep, too bad that we couldn't do anything but find ourselves here. And thank God in these rooms there's a solution. So anyway, I drank most of my life. And at the beginning there was no problems, but at the end, I got to a point where I could not drink. I could not, I would work, I would go, I would say I'm not going to stop by the package store on the way home, and I would make it home, but then out the door I would go and, get my supply, and I could not do that. And I remember just at the very end just drinking, and my body had gone to crap. Everything I passed was water. I was not eating. I was only drinking. I wasn't drinking water, and I was just sick, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I couldn't brush my teeth without gagging. I was just, at that point I had retired, so I had all day, So I remember I was sitting in my spot in the living room with, at the end of it, I'd gone through all the booze, all the scotch, all the rum, all the so I landed on beer and wine. So I'm not sure which chased the other, but I had both. And I would drink, that's what I drank. And I was doing that and knowing that it was killing me, but not being able to stop doing it, and not even sure I wanted to stop doing it. I didn't want to do the work that it would require to stop doing it because I had been here before. And I was shit, I don't want to go back to those meetings. I don't want to go back, and this is when God showed up in the form of my daughter, who called me. She lives out in the West Coast, and she called me and she said, Mom, I think I found a place that can help you. And it turned out that her boss was one of us, and she was comfortable enough with him to tell him about me because she was afraid I was going to die. And he did what we are supposed to do, and he drove my daughter 2 hours to a place in Calistoga called Duffy's, and where he had gotten sober. And my daughter saw it, and that's when she called and told me about this place. And I didn't know it at the time, but I recognized that it was my out. It was a way for me to finally stop drinking that I had been asking for, but not even knowing I'd been asking for. I'd been asking for it because I couldn't stop drinking. And I just made the arrangements. I didn't stop to think because I knew I would not go. And I just followed God's path. And I was on a plane. I was on my way to Sacramento within a few days. And I remember taking my last drink on an airplane on the way down, because I would always get I can't remember what the name of it was. That's so cool. But every time I flew, I would get this drink. How was it? Anyway, it doesn't matter at this point. But and thinking to myself, wow, wouldn't it be cool if this was the last drink I had? So I landed in Sacramento, and because it's all part of California, it's all wine and all that good stuff. So in the airport, they have this really cool wine shop, all fancy schmancy, So I'm thinking, I'll get them a bottle of wine, to thank them for, thank my daughter for all this. So I go in, you know where it's going, right? So I go in and I get this bottle of wine. It's wrapped in this beautiful packaging, and I'm so impressed with myself. So my daughter picks me up and get to her house, and I present her and her wife with this wine. And they said, oh, no thank you. And I know it's because they didn't want me to drink and they didn't want to drink in front of me, but I wasn't going to waste the wine. So I ended up bringing it upstairs to my room, and I drank the wine, and because that's how we think, I'm not going to let a good bottle of wine go, and I had paid a little bit of money for that wine, right? So the next day was the day I was leaving, and I remember going down. They had beer in their IPA in the fridge. I had checked it out the night before. And I remembered it, so I had to grab a beer. They're in the car. My daughter's in the car waiting, and I'm in the kitchen popping open this beer and guzzling as much as I could before I got in the car, right? And when I think back on it, I was a poster child of an alcoholic. I could not do that. All I could think about was this is the last drink I'm going to have. And she beeps the horn, I pour it down the sink, and off we go. And down to get to Calistoga, it's in the middle of Napa. You have to go through wine country. And I'm talking everywhere you look, there's a winery just inviting you in. Every brand of wine is there, and you could go through, because I'd been through them. And we get to this place, and when I tell you that this feeling of relief came over me, and fear, because I didn't know what to expect, but all I knew was that I was going to get well. I was going to get better, and I had made up my mind that whatever it was they asked me to do, I would do it. Whatever it took to stay sober, I would do it. And I promised myself that. And so I went, and I spent 30 days there. And at the end of those 30 days, you have to make a game plan, an exit plan. And so one of the plans that I had was meetings that I would go to when I came home. And one of the meetings was Big Book Step Study. And when I got home, I was working on my, the 90-90 and all that. And I went to my first Big Book Step Study in Marlborough at the Ark. And at that time, it was packed like this. This is big for Marlborough. Anyway, and there was only one seat in that whole place. And it was next to this woman. And I asked if anybody was sitting there, and she said, "No, it's yours." And I took that seat, and she ended up being my sponsor. And I'm telling you, it was a God moment. It was just meant to be, And that's what I am That's why I'm so grateful, because God was there the whole time on my journey. All I had to do was follow it, and He was putting things in place for me to follow. And so, I got to go through this process, and this process is such a blessing because it's unlike anything I'd ever done before, And I got honest with myself. And today, God is the most important thing in my life. And in the beginning, I had faith. I believed in God. I believed in God. But through this process, I've come to have a relationship with God that is second to none, and there are no coincidences. And I feel like, for instance, when I'm troubled, I go to the cemetery where my parents are, and this one particular time, I just said, "Oh, I just wish I could hug you," and I felt the pressure on both sides of my shoulder of them, their arms wrapped around me, things like that happen a lot, and. Today, when I've gone through, I don't even know how much that I've gone through so many things in the years I've been sober, good and bad, and I'm able to get through them because I've gone from believing to having a faith that God is going to take care of me and take care of things, and there are countless of things that I could tell you that happened, and one of them was when my grandson was born with what's called myotonic dystrophy, and he lived 10 days. And we thought he was going to be okay, and we flew out to California because we had planned it. And the next day they called and said, "You got to get back. He's not going to make it." And I went to a meeting. And I had never been to this meeting, but I went to this meeting and I was able to share that, to share that. And because I didn't know what else to do. And after the meeting, when I left, a gentleman not chased me down, but ran after me on the street, and he told me that the exact same thing had happened to him. And that he had lost a child, not for myotonic dystrophy, but a baby, a grandson. And had I not gone to that meeting, I would not have heard that. And what he told me was how he eulogized him. And he said that he asked everyone to think about what the baby's life had meant to them. And that's what I use when I eulogize Jackson, And so those are the kinds of things that God puts in front of me, He keeps doing this stuff to make me go from belief to faith all the time. And because of this program, I don't even know how many stories of that. It's like He lives within me. And there was something that I was reading yesterday, and I had to write it in the back of the last page of this thing. I'm going to have to read it, but I'm always coming up with stuff that, Jesus, this book is so ragged. I'm always coming up with stuff that I find and I write down so that I don't forget. And I didn't, where I wrote it? Well, never mind. But the point of it was, oh, here it is. It says, God lives in me when I have a feeling that I shouldn't be doing something. And I do it anyway, and then it's a disaster, and I say, oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that. Well, that's God telling me in the first place. You know, that's that feeling, and that's how I know that he, you know, those are the things that's how I know he lives in me, because you get those mornings, you know, that feeling in your gut, that pit that just doesn't feel right. You know, those are God moments. That's you know, that's what I believe anyway. You know, and I never paid attention to any of that stuff when I was out drinking. It never occurred to me. Nothing like that occurred to me. And I when I think back on all the jackpots that happened to me over the years, you know, the places and the people and the situations that I never should have been in that, you know, for real, almost killed me. Yeah. You know, and I know now that that was God. You know, I think back on my grandmother was one of 11 kids, and we called them, now they're all deceased, but we call them the Greats. And they lived in the South, and the cot picked and worked in the South. And my mother told me this story about how one day someone was lynched on their steps. But here's the deal. This is how God works. They never instilled hate into my mom, when in fact you could think, or you could say that was a justifiable thing to do. But my mother passed on to us, you know, do unto others, be kind, kill them with kindness, you know, all of those things. And I am forever grateful that I had that start, because it planted that seed of being willing to believe. And I don't know where I'm going with all this stuff, but I just know that when I couldn't stop drinking, God stepped in, you know. When I can't face things, when things are really a mess with my children or, you know, whatever, as long as I can turn it over, and I've learned to trust and rely on God and leave it with him, and don't try and take it back, just leave it, it works out. You know, and I'll tell you, it's the best feeling where you're not trying to run that show, you're not trying to make it happen the way you think it should happen, when it should happen, and all the rest of that stuff. You can kind of sit back and say, okay, God's got it. When I don't do that, I'm a crazy person. You know, I'm trying to fix it, I'm trying to make it happen, I'm trying to do all of this stuff, and I'm restless and I'm discontent, and it's not working for me. And so when I can do that, and it takes a lot of practice, especially when it comes to my children, you know, to be able to put it in God's hands and leave it there, because, you know, they've struggled with drugs, you know, alcohol's one of them, and being an addict and an alcoholic myself, and seeing it, you know, that's the hardest part. The hardest thing to do is to watch your children suffer through something like that, knowing, you know. But I just give it to God. And I say, they've got a God and I'm not it, and he will take care of them. And those are the things that I've learned through this process, you know, and working this program and doing the work. I remember doing my writing, and it was a particularly difficult part to write. And I put it off and put it off. So again, I go to the cemetery and I sit there with my parents and I'm writing this part and I'm crying. It's pouring rain. I'm in the car and it's pouring rain. I'm crying. I'm writing. I'm crying. And I finished writing that part of it, and the clouds break and the sun comes up. You know, that's the kind of stuff for me. Those are the God moments. And so he's always showing me that he's there. And he's always showing me that he cares. And he's always showing me that as long as I believe, now that I've seen all the things he does, I have the faith that he'll do whatever it's supposed to be. And it might not be what I want, might not be in the time I want it to be in, but he's always there and he's always on time. And there's an old saying in our church that says, won't he do it? Yes, he will. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I do know that I am so grateful that I have a God in my life. I am so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't even imagine how I didn't want to come. And I'll tell you, this time around was the first time I realized that Alcoholics Anonymous' responsibility is to put my hand in God's hand. I had no idea that it was all about God. You know, I really didn't, to the extent that it is, and it's all about helping each other. And I have this big vision in my head where we're all in the same boat, and the whole plan is to keep each other in, you know, and to reach out to help somebody. And no matter how many times they come in, as long as they're coming, you know, they're welcome. And you don't want to see anybody fail, you know. So I just work with other people. I work with other women. I love seeing that light come on, you know, and that, what they say, the luster to tired eyes, that kind of thing, you know. It's just so much. There's just so much. And every time I read to them, I see something else. We read with them, I find something else that I hadn't. Where did that come from? I read this book. You can tell I've read this book a bunch of times, but I didn't see that, you know. So, again, if you are, wherever you are in this process, you know, if you're reading, if you're writing, if you're finished, you know what I'm going to say. It's the best gift I've ever given myself, you know. And if you're not, get there, because I'm telling you, the blessing of this program, the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a God-given program. It's like God got tired of seeing us suffer, you know, and there's nothing but divinity in this. There's no way that God didn't have a hand in this solution, you know, and thank God the solution is here for us as long as we want it. So that's it. I think that's all I got. So thank you so much for inviting me.